November 14, 1978, began like any other brisk fall morning in Grand Rapids, Michigan. The streets were lined with fiery orange and gold leaves, and the smell of wet earth hung in the air. But for 24-year-old Sophia Martinez, that day would be her last. A recent graduate in social work, she had spent the previous night at a community fundraiser, volunteering at the city's youth center, a place where she had already made a name for her kind heart and dedication to children in need. By 9 a.m., neighbors noticed her car still parked outside her apartment. Her roommate, Lisa, knocked repeatedly, receiving no answer. As the morning passed, unease set in. Sophia, normally punctual and communicative, had vanished. By late afternoon, concerned friends called police. Detectives arrived at Sophia's apartment to find signs of a struggle. A toppled chair in the kitchen, a shattered coffee mug, and a trail of blood leading to her bedroom. But Sophia was gone. No note, no indication of motive, and no suspect. The only clue left behind was a faint fingerprint on the kitchen counter and traces of hair not belonging to anyone in her household. For years, Sophia's disappearance became a haunting mystery. The community, shocked that such a bright, caring young woman could vanish without a trace, remained vigilant but hopeless. Friends organized searches, posted flyers, and created support networks for families of missing persons. Her mother, Isabella Martinez, refused to let the case fade into obscurity. She called every police precinct, spoke to reporters, and participated in city council meetings advocating for better protections for women living alone. Despite decades of investigation, the case went cold. Leads evaporated, suspects vanished into obscurity, and evidence sat in storage, untouched, waiting for a breakthrough. Then, in 2018, a subtle technological revolution would reignite hope. DNA processing had advanced beyond recognition, and a new method, genetic genealogy, allowed law enforcement to solve cold cases. Decades old by connecting crime scene DNA to distant relatives in public databases. Detective Marcus Reynolds, a seasoned officer who had grown up in Grand Rapids, was assigned to re-examine Sophia's case. The file was thick, yellowed with age, but every page screamed the same frustration. No answers, no closure, no justice. Reynolds personally reviewed each piece of evidence, including the hair strands and fingerprints collected from the scene. He noted something that had been overlooked: tiny flecks of blood beneath Sophia's fingernails, preserved in evidence vials that had never been tested with modern techniques. On January 3, 2019, the samples were sent to a specialized forensic laboratory, one capable of building a DNA profile from even the most degraded material. Detective Reynolds remembered that day vividly. "I didn't know if it would work. 41 years had passed. But I had to try. Sophia deserved that chance." Weeks later, the lab produced a complete DNA profile. It was run through both traditional criminal databases and public ancestry sites where users voluntarily shared genetic information. The results were staggering. No direct matches existed, but distant relatives were identified. The genealogical team, working tirelessly, began constructing family trees, tracing the DNA links back several generations. They meticulously narrowed the search based on age, location, and other demographic factors. By March 2019, investigators had a short list of potential suspects. Names that had appeared fleetingly in old reports, long dismissed or forgotten, began resurfacing. One name caused a stir: Thomas Granger, a former neighbor and local handyman. In 1978, he had been 35, married, and known for his quiet demeanor and occasional volunteer work at local shelters, the same places Sophia frequented. At the time, he had no criminal record and was never considered a person of interest. Detectives faced a dilemma: how to obtain a DNA sample without alerting Granger and potentially compromising the investigation. After days of discreet surveillance, an opportunity arose. Granger left a discarded coffee cup at a local diner, which was collected by officers and sent for analysis. On April 7, 2019, the DNA results returned, a match with the blood under Sophia's fingernails, probability 99.9997%. Detective Reynolds, standing in the lab, felt a mix of elation and disbelief. 41 years had passed, and yet, for the first time since 1978, they had a name. The man responsible for Sophia's disappearance and death had been living freely among the community for decades. Reynolds and his team began preparing for an arrest, understanding the delicate nature of apprehending someone who had embedded himself into society and maintained a seemingly normal life for over 40 years. The community's shock would be immense. But for Isabella Martinez and those who had never given up hope, this was the long-awaited moment of justice. April 15, 2019, dawned over Grand Rapids with an almost eerie calm, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Detective Marcus Reynolds and his team had spent weeks meticulously preparing to confront Thomas Granger, the man identified through DNA as the killer of 24-year-old Sophia Martinez. Granger, now 76, had lived quietly for decades in the same neighborhood, a man whose gentle smile and helpful demeanor had deceived an entire community. Reynolds remembered the first time he saw Granger's profile come up in the genealogy results. "I froze," he recalled later. This was someone everyone knew. No one suspected him, and yet the evidence didn't lie. The surveillance operation began in early April. Officers documented Granger's daily routine: morning coffee at the diner, volunteering at the community center, checking in on elderly neighbors, and tending to his modest garden. Every step was catalogued to ensure a clean, safe, and controlled arrest. They waited for an opportunity to discreetly collect DNA for final confirmation. That opportunity came unexpectedly. On April 12th, Granger left behind a discarded pen at the community center. The forensic team collected it without his knowledge, and within hours, DNA analysis confirmed what the genealogy results had indicated. Thomas Granger was indeed Sophia's killer. The probability matched exceeded 99.999%. Reynolds convened a briefing with his team. "We now have the irrefutable proof," he said. "We need to plan the arrest in a way that respects the gravity of the case, but also considers his age and the impact on the community. This man has lived a lie for 41 years. Investigators then delved into Granger's life since 1978. What they discovered was chilling. Far from being a recluse, Granger had constructed a carefully curated life of trust and respect. He volunteered weekly at local shelters, mentored troubled teenagers, and attended charity events. Neighbors described him as the helpful handyman, always ready to fix a leaky faucet or trim a yard. Those closest to him were utterly unaware of the darkness lurking beneath the surface. His connection to Sophia's family was subtle but insidious. He had occasionally offered assistance to her mother, Isabella Martinez, during community events, positioning himself as a supportive neighbor. It was almost as if he had taken perverse satisfaction in being physically close to the people most devastated by the crime he committed. April 16th, 2019. The arrest team moved into position. At 7:05 a.m., unmarked police vehicles silently surrounded Granger's home. Officers stationed themselves strategically, ensuring multiple exit points were covered. Reynolds took a deep breath. This wasn't just a simple arrest, it was the culmination of over 4 decades of unanswered questions, and grief. Granger opened the door to find 5 officers standing silently. His eyes, usually calm and calculating, widened slightly. The words came out almost automatically. "Detective Reynolds." What is this about?" Reynolds, maintaining a controlled tone, explained the situation and placed Granger under arrest for the murder of Sophia Martinez. There was no resistance. Granger's wife, who had lived alongside him for over 40 years, appeared confused and shaken. Her life built around a man she thought she knew. The news spread through Grand Rapids within hours. Residents who had once trusted Granger struggled to reconcile the image of the kindly handyman with the man now revealed as a murderer. Former neighbors, colleagues, and friends expressed disbelief and horror, many commenting that they had interacted with him dozens of times over the years without ever suspecting the truth. Meanwhile, Isabella Martinez was informed personally by Detective Reynolds. At 80 years old, she had never stopped hoping for justice for Sophia. The news brought tears, but also a profound sense of relief. "I have waited 41 years to hear that name," she said. "Finally, we can say Sophia's story isn't forgotten." Investigators meticulously reconstructed Granger's movements on the night Sophia vanished, using old case files, newly analyzed forensic evidence, and witness interviews. They discovered that Granger had approached Sophia under the guise of helping her with an apartment repair. A confrontation occurred, though the exact details remain unknown. The result was fatal. Sophia's life was cut short in a moment that would echo across the decades. As part of the arrest preparations, officers also recovered evidence Granger had kept hidden for decades: a small box of personal mementos tied to Sophia, carefully stored in a locked cabinet in his basement. It was a horrifying confirmation of the obsessive, calculated nature of his crime. The city grappled with a mix of shock, betrayal, and cautious relief. People who had once waved to Granger on morning walks now questioned every interaction from the past 40 years. How many times had he smiled at a neighbor or mentored a young person, all while carrying such a dark secret? Detective Reynolds reflected on the case. This isn't just about catching a killer. It's about showing that even when justice is delayed, it can still be delivered. Sophia's family, the community, and future generations now have the truth. The groundwork was set for the final act: the court proceedings, the confessions, and the community's confrontation with a man who had led a double life for over 4 decades. The courtroom in Grand Rapids had never seen anything like it. On May 20th, 2019, journalists, former detectives, family members, and curious residents packed every seat. The story of Sophia Martinez, vibrant 24-year-old, whose life was stolen in 1978, was about to reach its long-awaited conclusion. Thomas Granger, 76 years old, entered the room in handcuffs, flanked by officers. Gone was the genial, community-minded man the neighborhood had known. In his place stood a figure whose calm exterior now seemed hollow, his eyes scanning the room with the same analytical intensity he had used decades ago in secret. The prosecution presented a compelling case. a combination of newly extracted DNA evidence, genetic genealogy analysis, witness statements, and decades-old case files. Every piece, meticulously documented, painted a clear picture of Granger's guilt. The genetic match alone, 99.999%, certainty left no room for doubt. Isabella Martinez, Sophia's mother, was present, her frail hands clutching a folded tissue. 41 years of unanswered questions, sleepless nights, and silent grief culminated in this moment. As the prosecutor detailed Granger's movements on the night of Sophia's murder, her eyes filled with tears, but her expression remained resolute. She had waited decades for justice, and it had finally arrived. Granger's defense lawyer attempted to argue diminished capacity and the passage of time, but the courtroom remained unmoved. The evidence was too overwhelming, the chain of custody flawless, and the forensic analysis beyond reproach. It was a stark reminder that no matter how many years had passed, truth cannot remain buried forever. Victims, rights advocates, and community members filled the gallery, many visibly shaken as they heard how Granger had maintained his innocent facade while living among those who had trusted him. He had volunteered at shelters, mentored children, and even attended neighborhood events commemorating Sophia's life, while keeping the horrifying secret of her murder locked away. When offered the chance to speak, Granger rose slowly, adjusting his glasses as he addressed the courtroom. His voice was calm, measured, almost eerily composed. "I take full responsibility for my actions. There is no justification. I cannot undo what I did to Sophia Martinez. I can only acknowledge it now, at the end of my life." His words were met with silence, a collective acknowledgement of the magnitude of decades-long deception. The judge, maintaining a solemn tone, sentenced Thomas Granger to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. At 76, it was understood by all present that Granger would spend the remainder of his life behind bars, paying the ultimate price for a crime that had haunted the community for over 4 decades. Outside the courtroom, the atmosphere was heavy but tinged with relief. Neighbors, former friends, and family members struggled to reconcile the two versions of the man they had known. The helpful neighbor and the cold-blooded killer. The emotional complexity of living alongside someone capable of such calculated deception left lasting scars, but also reinforced the power of perseverance in seeking justice. Isabella Martinez spoke publicly for the first time after the verdict. "For 41 years, I have carried the absence of my daughter in my heart," she said. "Today, a piece of that void has been filled. Sophia's life and memory will never be forgotten, and the truth has finally come to light." The city of Grand Rapids reflected on the lessons of the case. Local law enforcement began reviewing decades-old cold cases with renewed hope. Inspired by the success of modern forensic techniques like genetic genealogy, schools incorporated discussions about ethics, personal responsibility, and scientific advances in criminal justice, using Sophia's story as a powerful teaching tool. Sophia's memory was honored through a community memorial in the park near her former apartment. Friends, neighbors, and family members gathered to plant trees, light candles, and share stories of a young woman whose life, though tragically cut short, had inspired courage, perseverance, and an unwavering pursuit of truth. As the first anniversary of the sentencing approached, Isabella Martinez reflected quietly on the journey. 41 years of waiting, grieving, and hoping had finally led to justice. "We cannot bring Sophia back," she said softly, "but we can ensure that her story and the truth of what happened never fades. That is the legacy she deserves." If you want more cold cases solved after decades, and stories where modern science brings closure to families who've waited years for answers, subscribe to our channel, like this video, share it with friends, and comment below with your thoughts. Every engagement helps keep these stories alive and ensures that victims like Sophia Martinez are never forgotten.